Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Compelling Conversations podcast. Today, I'm honored to be joined by my friend Maher. Maher,
Right,
thanks so much for being here, bro.
of course.
Maher, I wanted to begin, man, by discussing with you. You're like the best tutor that I've had, honestly. And I just have to applaud you for that. And what I really liked about your tutoring abilities was that you never passed judgment over the learner. You were always like empathetic and mindful, and the way you taught, like that's just how you that's what your teaching abilities resonate. Just that sort of kindness, that sympathy, that understanding that everybody takes their time to learn. Where does that come from you? Why do you think it's important?
Well, the truth is, um, I want to say since I started tutoring, I learned throughout my time that everyone has different learning paths. Some people have learned different materials maybe earlier on in their lives. Some people may have learned it maybe in a more natural way, but then there might be another group of people who may have had little bit more difficult time grasping the material, or maybe they might have taken their time in understanding it. And maybe that's because of personal reasons or other factors. So when I first started tutoring, people would assume, yeah, you have to look into knowing the concepts, trying to understand it to them. But in reality, for me, it's all about where the learner is and their mindset going into like I guess the examinations, because since I did organic chemistry with you, um, and the truth is I was in your position. Like all the courses that I tutor, I've taken and I've experienced. So I kind of try to use my experience in a way to help out the rest of the tutees that I have in a way that they could relate and that they could see as beneficial in a way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Another thing that I think is really amazing is when a person gets like even a little bit of knowledge, it's very possible for them to become arrogant about it. But I never saw that in you. You were always like very humble with the way that you did things. I'm curious if you've ever wrestled with that, or if you had a little bit of knowledge and you felt arrogant about it, and how you dealt with that, if it ever happened to be.
Well, maybe when I was younger, I was more arrogant, and maybe through experience, I started to learn how to control that in a way. Um, but I would say that, yeah, you wrestle through it. There are sometimes in your head, psychologically, you think about those thoughts, but for me, I don't think about it too much. I guess it's because of the way I've kind of been grown up. When I think about arrogance, it's something that we don't really believe in, something that we don't really try to transpire towards other people. Like I understand when you're taking a course as rigorous as organic chemistry, it's going to be very competitive, very rigorous, and I get the arrogance behind it. But at the same time, when I look at it, when I look at just education in general, it shouldn't just revolve around, someone dominating at the top constantly. There has to be some sort of middle ground in between. And I feel like the purpose of education is to help out the community understanding of what they're doing. So that part of it really balances out because when you have education in play, you create a different community and a more educated surrounding around you. So, um, on my perspective, I don't think about it too much. It does linger in a little bit, maybe some frustrating days and others, but I try to look at the bigger picture.
You mentioned community, and I'm curious, is community important to you? And if so, what do you make of that?
Yeah, it's it's pretty big for me because growing I'm very close with like my family and we're very close to the community that we're involved in. And it doesn't matter if it's a low socioeconomic status or high socioeconomic status. The important thing on our end is the people that we interact, whether if it's, people from the Middle East, where a lot of my family is from, or from other cultures. Really, I've had, that's one thing I love about Houston. It's very diverse, and there's loads of communities, loads of cultures, and the truth is we're all human. I don't really see us as completely different with each other. So, in my perspective, community is key, and I feel like having that niche connectedness between those little tiny communities is really important in building yourself up into who you are into the future. So, for me, the importance of it is huge, and I love all kinds of communities. I interact with all kinds of communities because, I mean, like what I mentioned, I love cultures, first of all, but secondly, I really like the idea of I guess the community being unified as one. It doesn't matter by your gender, your race, your ethnic status. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what I look for into a community.
Yeah. I remember it was so funny when you were when I'd attended your sessions, I just thought you were like a just another white guy. And then I run into you in the basement and you're like praying. And I'm like, oh my God, like this guy, he's also a Muslim. Like that's wild. And you mentioned like culture and stuff. We had an interesting conversation one time about your trip to China and how you saw it as like another world. Could you please expand on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I get that a lot. The fact that, everyone assumes that I'm white. A lot of people think I'm German because they see I have a little bit of an accent, but and then they see me like pray, for instance, and they're so confused. Uh, I went to like Mecca for like Umrah once, and uh, when I went, a lot of people were questioning. Actually, a lot of people question, how did I convert? When did I convert? And it was a little bit awkward on my end. So,
Oh, that's funny.
yeah. And then I started speaking a little bit of Arabic with them, and they were confused as well. They were like, there's this white guy speaking a little bit. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
uh, so there's that. But China was different because obviously, I mean, physically it's different because it's literally halfway across the world, right? But when I've talked to a few people who have been, and they've told me a few stories about it, right? Some people have told me like it's great, it's really nice to go see the culture and the history behind it. But then some people have told me like, oh, it's not the greatest place to go because it's pretty polluted, so the air is really bad. It can get scorching hot if you go at certain times and all this kind of stuff. So I was like, you know what, it's a bit mixed. I'm gonna go in with an open mindset. So when I went, it was it was not what I expected. Let's say that. The weather was really nice. The air quality was really good. The history was amazing. When you look at all the dynasties that have existed there, um, and I really, really enjoyed it because everything just functions so differently. Like, for instance, like how we use like a Uber system, right? To like get us from one place to another. They have something. It's similar to like WhatsApp. It's called WeChat. It's a Chinese like app, and they can do everything with it. Like they can order like an Uber like system out of it. They can like make cash payments out of it, like a Venmo. I believe they can even order stuff like online, like on Amazon. Because in China, it's um, basically when I went. When you look at like social media, it kind of limits you, especially the ones like made in the US. So I didn't have access to Instagram. I didn't have access to Snapchats. I didn't even have access to my email because I don't like Google as well. So
Wow.
it was a different experience because I didn't have any of those stuff. The only thing I had was TikTok, and I that was the first time I used TikTok, and I was in like the Chinese TikTok, and I was like, maybe this isn't my kind of crowd, because I couldn't understand anything. But yeah, it was kind of like a complete disclosure of the social media, which I really liked. And I was there for about 2 weeks. And obviously, people could use like a VPN so they could access that kind of stuff. But I was like, no, let's just get off of social media and just enjoy it. So when I was there, I had a lot of attention. Some people were kind of surprised when I said that, but yeah, I mean, attention to the point where people, because like I was probably one of the few people, and maybe the same with like my sister, where we had like blonde hair, we were white. Uh, so like I got a lot of people asking me to take pictures with them. I think about like 12 times at least. And I even was in a TikTok at one point. So
Wow.
yeah, I mean we didn't post it because I was like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. Uh,
Man, that's
uh,
funny.
but yeah, it's completely different the way everything is interacted. The food is not what you expect because you know with Chinese food in the States, it's like your dumplings, your lo mein, and all this kind of stuff. In China, it's more authentic in a way. Like it's stuff that I don't think would be legal to serve in the US. So I'm glad I didn't get food poisoning or get any sickness out of it. And it was pretty good food. I'll admit it was pretty good food, but it's very different compared to in the States because I feel like in the States they make it very, I guess like sugar like there's more calories and more intake behind it, as opposed in China. Some of the things seem more healthier as options. So I mean, everything about it was so crazy. You know, I have been traveling to different places, but I've never experienced a culture change like that. And it's such, I feel like it's such a great country, and you can see that when you're in the city itself. And I guess that makes sense because, you know, there's a billion people there. But when you look at the Chinese markets, it's just a growing business. Like, now I don't have any shares in Chinese markets, but I'm always following them because they're such a global industry that I feel like in the long term, they can sustain themselves pretty well. So yeah.
I'm curious, like here in America, we're kind of young, our history. And so we're still kind of finding an identity, so to speak. But in China, as you mentioned, dynasties of history. When you were walking there, did you feel like you were walking in history, through history?
Yeah. So when I, especially, well, some cities. So I was in, so Beijing is a very historical city, right? Because you have like the Forbidden Sea, and then not far away from Beijing is the Great Wall of China. So it's very historic. You see the historical dynasty roots. But an issue that China had maybe around, what I want to say the mid or like 1900s in general was that they were lacking modern, like modern class, like modern leadership. So I also went to Shanghai, which is a very modern city. Now there was some historical things, and there's some things that I noted, but you can tell they changed their dynamic completely. Like it was even the smallest details you can think of, like from you would still have like the ancient, like historical parts of Shanghai, but they would modernize it internally to make them into shops so people can shop it through them, like at a little shopping square. Um, and then they try to, I mean, I guess the reason why they did all like this modernization was to try to revolutionize China and try to make them into the market, saying like, okay, you know, like with the dynasties, China was like this big powerhouse. A lot of countries or a lot of people wanted to visit China because they've heard about it. So China wanted to emulate that again. So the example of Shanghai, like this big city that's always modernized, always trying to innovate, starts to grow exponentially over time. And it's just crazy how fast the city has grown. Like I went to like a museum, like how the city was grown, and like this huge like 3D landscape map that they like made out of like Legos or something like that. I don't know, but it was massive. And they were telling me like, oh yeah, they're gonna make even bigger. I'm like, how? Like this is too much already. But it's because a lot of people are trying to be more urbanized and they want to be more modern. And Shanghai is like the perfect place for that because there's a lot of international dealings that go on in Shanghai. Um, so it's a bit of both, but I would say I saw more of the historical side because I also went to like smaller towns is like 4 to 5 million people in population. So I you can make that as what you will, a small town, but to them
Houston.
it's a small town. Yeah, it's basically Houston. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's wild.
every time we went to like one small city to another, I'm like, oh, how big is it? And they're like, oh, it's about like 3 or 4 million. I'm like, oh, okay, so it's basically about Houston size. I'm like, oh yeah, pretty much. I'm like, okay. Um,
Did you ever get tired there?
yeah, I mean, the jet lag was really bad. I remember from there and when I came back to Houston, because when I went over there for the first day, I wasn't too exhausted to be fair, because I think we were walking around and moving around, and I had some caffeine in me, one way or another. But when I came back, yeah, it it really did hit me like, oh man, I was so stupid for doing this. But when I came back, I couldn't sleep on the plane, and I couldn't sleep when I was here. So when we arrived, like maybe 10 a.m., I was like, oh great, we have the whole day. And right then when I like came back, I fell asleep, and then I woke up and I looked outside. I was like, oh, it's dark. It literally went from like
Damn.
noon to like 8, and I was like, oh no. So I couldn't go to sleep that night, and it took me a while to get used to getting to sleep here. So that was
Yeah.
fun.
I was curious about that because yesterday, even today, really, it's cold. It's really cold.
Yeah.
And sitting at school, I was just realizing, wow, like the cold makes me tired. And being tired makes me more truthful in the sense of like my demeanor, perhaps, or like speaking to people, perhaps. Earlier, you mentioned scorching heat. It's interesting. I enjoy the heat. I feel like I perhaps thrive in it. But with the cold, it's like, oh man, like I don't know. It freezes me, literally. I'm curious where when you're tired, does it bring something out of you that you didn't notice before? Like, oh, like this is just this is new to me.
Yeah, for sure. I'm kind of like you, where like if it's cold outside, I feel like the part of that's because when you go inside buildings, it's so warm and you just want to go to sleep. Like I literally yesterday, uh, I tried my hardest to pay attention in lectures. I couldn't. It was so hard for me. And then when I went to try to study in the library, I literally fell asleep for like half an hour just to get some sleep in, because I also had bad sleep last night. So I guess that might have been a part of it. But I'm the same way. I thrive under the heat. Because I feel like in the colds, I feel like I don't. What I see is like I don't want to be there. And when you think about that mindset, you're like starting to panic. I've done camping in my life, and when I've done camping, I've done it like in the cold usually. I don't know how I
Wow.
survived or how I woke up, because literally
Yeah.
when I would like get up, it'll be freezing. You just get used to it, I guess. So I think it's just more about adaptation. But I'm with you, because I feel like in Houston it's pretty much warm, and from growing up in the past, I've grown up in warmer climates. So on my end, maybe that's why I prefer like the warmer sides. I have family in like Detroit, like really, really up north, and they would tell me like, "Oh, you're crazy! Like I'd rather like be in the cold." And I can't see that. Maybe it's just because they've gotten used to it over time, so it's more of like
Yeah.
an adaptation, I think. But I would argue that at the same time, I feel like it's also a preference, because your mindset would dictate what kind of environment you want to be in. So I guess it's a bit of both, but I would more lean towards adaptation.
Yeah. I remember I used to like the cold myself, and I had a high school teacher who said to the class one time, I'd rather be too hot than too cold. And I never understood what he was saying until the Houston freeze of 2021, bro. I don't know if you remember that.
That
That
was
that
fun.
was it was a fun time. It was exciting. But it was then that I realized, oh, this is what Mr. Sandifer meant. He'd rather be too hot than too cold.
Yeah.
You mentioned camping. I've never camped, but it sounds like a very exciting endeavor. Do you feel like a caveman when you camp? Or what do you extract from that experience?
uh, it's funny you say that. One time I actually camped in a cave for like a night. So I think that time I felt like a caveman. Yeah, I've done a decent amount of camping, because when I was younger, I used to do scouts a lot. Um, and we would go about once a month, sometimes twice a month, depending on my schedule, or even once every 2 months. It varied, but we would go camping on private facilities, sometimes in public camps. And I like it because you feel like you're more connected with the outdoors. So when you live in the urban life, you have a lot of luxuries, I would say, even if you're not in a very high economic status. Because when you're out camping and out by yourself, you feel like you're one with nature. And I mean, not only the fact that for me it's fun because maybe because I like the outdoors, I like doing certain activities, but I find it peaceful in a way because in the outdoors it's more quiet. Um, and there's some things that you can see in the like suburbs or like in certain campsites as opposed to in the city, like the stars, for instance. Every night I would always just try to look up and see if there's any stars, and usually there is where we're going. So I think it's just the peacefulness that I like. I'll be honest, I haven't done it in a long time, but I would love to do it at some point. One kind of camping that I've never done is like desert camping, and people tell me it's rough because they don't like the heat, but I'm willing to test that out myself. So I'm thinking about and trying it because I'm always someone open to trying new things and getting out of my comfort zone majority of the time. So, in my perspective, I would just keep trying at it and just trying to enjoy the outdoors. Because, like I said, I like to think of myself as a peaceful guy. Maybe some people would say otherwise. And for me, I like silence. People are like, why? And that sounds so creepy, but for me, I like it because you don't have to communicate through words. You don't have to emulate your happiness through words. If you sit there and just look around you and just enjoy the moment, I feel like that puts you in harmony, or it puts me in harmony, I should say.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Mhm.
How do you voluntarily escape the comfort zone?
Oh, mentally it's tough because your mind is telling you maybe you shouldn't be doing certain things, especially if it's like really, really risky. Like I don't know, like I know people are scared of going on roller coasters or something that's like adrenaline rushing, but I think over time it became like an adrenaline junkie. So I became more comfortable doing like zip lines. I did like parasailing one year.
My God,
Um,
that's so cool.
yeah, and parasailing, like people are like, my God, I'd be like super, super scared to do that. But for me, I'm like, nah, like I'm okay with doing that. I'm okay with, I guess, kind of risking my life because there's a guy I kind of aspire. Uh, his name is Ken Block. Unfortunately he died. Uh, well, this is February 1st, so last month. And yeah, it's sad, but at the same time, he enjoyed his life because he took so many risks. Like he used to own like a DC shoe company a long time ago. He was one of the co-founders of it. He made a lot of money off of it because he thought, you know what, I want to do something where I feel like I'm happy. So he sold the company. He took like racing school, and he did like certain like tricks that you can do with a car that no one can imagine. Um, and what he would mention about getting out of his comfort zone was just trying it and the purpose of being positive and being happy about it. And that's why I inspire to be whenever I'm doing these kind of activities. Obviously, there's
Y-
a risk and you want
Yeah,
to prioritize safety behind it. And I do get that side of it. But at the same time, I would rather look back at my life with more pride in what I did and trying different things. And it doesn't have to be that risky, but like those kind of risk activities. But I'd rather try something different and explore and see different perspectives of the world instead of being more concise and looking at things in a one dimension. So on my end,
yeah,
I'm okay with doing all those risks as long as it makes me happy and I enjoy it, then it's worth it for the memories.
yeah. I suppose in some sense the attempt is praiseworthy. And you had mentioned adrenaline junkie, and what it made me think about was horror. Do you ever thirst for fear? Like, do you ever voluntarily, watch a horror film? And I'm curious about this because one of the interesting things that Jordan Peterson talks about, and this is something just in the realm of psychology, is if you want to like overcome something, a fear, you face it voluntarily. And when you face it, it shrinks and shrivels and dies. Well, I don't know if it dies, but it shrivels. So I'm curious if you like voluntarily ever try to scare yourself. Is that a part of your adrenaline rush?
I do agree with that statement. And you do have to voluntarily go through it. Like, think of it this way. I know some people are scared of like presenting, like maybe in a class or in a board meeting. Um, but once they start presenting, that fear starts to dwindle down a bit, right? It doesn't go away completely because when you think about it, or my eyes, I think fear or like that nervousness that you get when you do something, it's important to have that side of it because having those nerves are a good thing because it means that, oh, okay, you've prepared so hard to do this thing. How are you going to showcase to the world that you want to do it? Or how are you going to showcase to the world that, okay, I am ready to do this? So it's okay to have the nerves. Um, but what I always like to think is, how do you control that nerve? Like how do you control the nervousness whenever you do something that's super risky, or when you do something that is out of your comfort zone? That's what you really need to think about. And once you hurdle over that and think about how you can overcome it, then everything, I mean, I don't think everything will come natural to you, but over time, when you're doing something over and over again, it will become closer, closer, closer to being natural over time, and you feel more comfortable doing it. So I think I don't really chase for it, but if there's something that I feel like, yeah, it would scare me, but I would try to do it anyway. That's kind of what's going on in my mind. It's how to overcome the nerves that kicks in once I edge closer and closer, closer to doing that thing. So
Do you ever fear
um,
failure?
I used to, I used to when I was younger, but I wouldn't say so now. I think my time in college has learned me a lot. Um, I would consider, the first part of my college is failure in a way, but at the same time, I value failure in a way that that's the most amount of time where you learn something out of it. I think if you're winning and you're succeeding, that's one thing, but if you're losing and you're failing, that's another thing. And I think when you're losing and you're failing, you learn from those mistakes even more. And that's something that I value personally. So I don't consider failure as a bad thing. I know on my side, like of my family, they would see that otherwise. They'll see like, okay, failure is failure, like in one dimension. But for me, I see it in different ways. I don't see it just like, okay, you failed. I see it, okay, you failed, but how are you going to improve? How are you going to stand up? How are you going to improve off of these negative aspects that you have? How are you going to make those changes? Um, and I think that's what helped me over time grow and develop into who I am. Those failures that set me back were life lessons, and they were big tests at me. And I had to question, is this really who I am? Is this really what I want to do? And then gradually over time, when I found ways to learn from those mistakes, I maybe found different avenues, different paths, different ways to improve myself in general. So it's a learning process that we need to take. So we shouldn't be scared of failure. We shouldn't be avoidant of failure. Because if life was perfect, I mean, I wouldn't consider anything to be exciting if life was perfect. If we had failures, if we had ups and downs, it brings emotion, it brings yeah, it brings different emotions. And in my opinion, those different emotions can lead to greater successes in the long term.
Yes,
Um,
I wanted to mention that I think from my experience at least, the stigma around fear of failure, so to speak, is you're kind of afraid of other people making fun of you, passing judgment on you. And this brings us back to what I said in the beginning. I really like how I felt like I could fail in front of you when I was learning because you wouldn't pass judgment on me. You were cool with seeing, like, okay, like that's wrong, but what's right and showing that way. And that's what I really appreciated. And honestly, like, I love that. Thank you. Do you ever get afraid of people making fun of you?
no, I don't feel okay. Maybe not on my end, but when my sister grew up, it was a little bit different. She had mixed feelings about some people because of the way they thought about her on her back. Some people ridiculed her. Some people, called her bad names and talked a lot of negative things about her. And although well, maybe I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure people have talked bad about me, but I don't like to think about it too much because it's their opinion. I don't have to be friends with everyone. That's the truth.
I
And
love that. I don't have to be friends with everyone. And that's
yeah,
something important. Just to be a human, that's an important thing to
mhm.
realize, huh?
Yeah, and it's true. No one has to like everyone the same, or you don't have to try so hard. I think there's some parts of my family that's kind of like that, where they're trying really hard to impress people. But for me, I don't get it. You want to be happy, right? So you don't have to impress
Yeah,
people so hard and try to like them in order to engage with them. You know what I mean? So
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
I
it
remember
doesn't.
yesterday. Yeah. Sorry for cutting you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that yesterday I was reflecting on this, where it's like, um, before I felt like everybody I met, I treated them with the same amount of interest and respect, and just like I was really genuinely curious about them. And I would wait for them to kind of like reveal interesting things about themselves to me, or like establish like some sincere connection. But as of late, I feel like there's some people that I just, when I come into their presence, my shoulders just drop and I droop. And it's not necessarily that they're bad people, but it's like, I feel like now I gauge more specifically who I'm interested in speaking with or interacting with. And I think that relates to that happiness aspect of, well, maybe there's nothing wrong with you. It's just you're drawn to certain people as opposed to others.
Agreed. It's funny. Yeah, I was thinking about that last week, ironically.
Interesting.
Because the truth, yeah, I know it's interesting because I was invited to like this party last week, or was it 2 weeks ago? I don't remember. It was sometime around that time. And it's people that I usually don't see, but and people ask me like, "Oh, why don't you come to these more events?" And a lot of them are like Syrians, and I get that, but I don't really, I don't really gel with them. I don't really connect with them. And it's not just me. I mean, it's the same with like my parents, for instance. So with that regards, we don't like to go to those kind of events because we don't feel comfortable, maybe, or we don't feel like we belong. So we were thinking, what's the point in going for like a social status? You might as well just not attend and enjoy your life in different aspects or different parts. You don't always have to stick with one group. And I think that's something that I've always learned as a kid. And I guess just being in Houston because it's so culturally diverse, you don't have to stay with one friend group or you don't have to stay with one specific area of friends. You can
Yeah.
always venture out, you can always meet new people. And who knows, maybe the people that you meet is someone that you stay close with for a long time. No one knows. Um,
Yeah,
so
no one
I,
knows. Like the way I met you, it's like I just randomly walked in to a session, a workshop.
yeah,
It's like, oh, we became friends.
yeah, it's
You
funny
never
how
know like what door you turn into and how it changes your life. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
exactly. No, it's funny how friends meet, because
Yeah.
some people, when they meet friends, it's like, oh yeah, you just walk into an unknown, you don't know who they are. Some people maybe they didn't like each other initially, and then they became closer to each other. So it's a funny
Yeah.
world, it's a funny world how we meet people, and sometimes those people can be really close with us. Um, in my personal opinion, I was grown up in a way where we don't really trust people. So I don't want to say like I don't have any friends, but like I do have friends, of course, but um it's there's like a certain boundary that I have with friends, like there's certain limits that I have, and that those certain limits cannot really be exceeded because I feel like those are things that are more private, and that's maybe something more geared towards my family. So but that's just how I was growing up, and I still kind of evolve through that mentality, but I still enjoy having company of different people and exploring different people's personalities. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, as I mentioned before, some people when you're in their presence, your shoulders just drop. And then some people like yourself, it's like you feel drawn to speaking to them. It's like, oh, cool. Like it's great. And I just wanted to mention one more thing. Um, yeah, just being respectful to everyone. It's an important thing, but again, sometimes if you feel like you just don't belong, it's okay. It's you just be respectful and you walk away, and that's just life. And
yeah,
um, I'm glad that we're friends. And
yeah.
I was curious, Maher. Do you have any closing thoughts? Anything that you felt like you wanted to say, you didn't get a chance to? Something on your mind that you wanted to express?
I feel like in life, whenever we're in this stage of our lives, it's the most critical period of our lives where we try to explore and maybe we try to create new destinies and new futures. So I think my closing thoughts would be enjoy it, live it to your best ability, because we don't know if this is our first or last time being at this age. Because obviously there's so many unknowns in the future. But I would say enjoy it because you never know. I always like to think you only live once, and that's always been my motto because you never know what's going to happen in the future. Um, you know, when we're growing up at an older age, you never know what's going to happen when we start working in a job in certain jobs. So that's kind of what I want to close it around because the truth is we don't know how many other opportunities we have. We might as well embrace it and try to live our best life. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Mhm.
It was a great conversation, man. I appreciate your time. I appreciate what you brought to the table. And I suppose until next time, my friend, take care, yeah?
Yeah. Take care, man. Good to see you as
Thanks.
always.
Likewise.